Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. Another episode of Iron Radio. This is Phil Stevens. I am a powerlifter, strength coach, youth sport coach, and maker of many things in the industry.
Cool. And I am Lonnie Lowry. I'm a university professor, about 25 years, just adjunct now, doing some consulting for various industries. Working on a book. In fact, in lieu of news, I thought I would offer a little excerpt from the book. I got approval from the publisher to talk about some of this. So we're going to talk about an amino acid today in particular. But anyway, yeah, Mike Nelson is not going to be with us. I did want to mention, though, he's got that big online workshop coming. So just Google MikeTNelson.com, I imagine. But apparently there's a lot of people signed up for that. I'm going to give a little lecture for Mike on what's going on with product innovations in coffee and protein, because that's always changing. So I just wanted to do that. And of course, Jarrell's not with us. He let us know that he had some athletes to train, I guess.
Yep.
Okay, let's do this thing with the amino acid. So I thought I would touch on this. I'm just going to kind of go through this occasionally in alphabetical order when I don't have really juicy stuff to talk about. Now, we do have something about ketogenic supplements that was sent in, and I can touch on that in future weeks. But for right now, I thought I would talk about arginine, because as I'm working on this book, a little backstory, a lot of what's happened in this book, by the way, is a huge list of dietary supplements. And the attraction is it's a single book that you can hold up, like one compendium, and say, this is where all of the supplements are. Like what's good, what's not. Now, we have to be careful about judgments like good or not good. I always joke with students, I don't have a single piece of equipment in my lab that measures good, right? So when people say, is that good? It depends. And I sound like you, Phil. It depends.
Yeah.
What's your goal? But arginine is something that has changed over the years, so I thought I would give you an update. Back in the day, when I was literally early 90s in grad school, starting grad school, I was in a study where we were fed up to 30 grams of arginine orally, 30 capsules. I felt like a baby rattle, like if you shook me, I would rattle. And when you take that much, you tend to get diarrhea. It overwhelms your intestine's ability to absorb it, and you get the runs. So there was all this talk about GH release, if you remember, arginine and ornithine. Ornithine is a weird amino acid that's not part of protein like arginine is. I don't want to bore people, but they gave us combinations of these things in huge doses, and they looked at our growth hormone release during exercise. Long story short, it didn't work. Intravenous arginine in really high doses like that, like 30 grams, will stimulate your pituitary gland to make GH. And that's, that's amazing. The one memory I have from that research actually is that the 20-somethings, of which I was one at the time, we had this huge GH surge just from exercising. And the people, the 30-somethings, nothing, almost nothing, a sad little blip. And I'm like, oh. And that really explains a lot how soft tissues and joints start to go. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's the physical abuse that goes on, but you also have less growth hormone response to exercise. Anyway, so arginine has moved on from that. Let me just offer a few things. So it says, what is it? Because that's the way this is set up. What is it? How does it work? What's the research say? What is it? Well, first of all, single amino acids can have nutraceutical effects. I think it's important people understand that. If you take one of the 20 amino acids that are important to people, human protein, they do cool, almost pharmaceutical type things. And GH release would be one, but unfortunately, probably not from an oral route. Arginine, it's conditionally essential. So your body can make it, but not enough under certain conditions. And I'm not going to go into specific ones. I think they're a little less relevant to athletes, but typically we consume 3 to 6 grams of arginine daily from food, right? It's built into the proteins in the foods that we eat. So how does it work? Arginine has a number of roles in the body, actually. It can be metabolized into glucose for energy. Again, at sufficiently high, usually intravenous doses of 12 to 30 grams, it can cause GH secretion. And again, I'm just drawing this from the book. But results from oral administration are inconsistent. I mean, there was a study done Isadori and colleagues, I still remember this decades later. Oh, look, it tickled your pituitary, you got GH release. No other labs were able to see that. So I don't know what they did differently or if there were commercial interest. I'm not going to speculate, but nobody was able to replicate that. And that's the hard rule of science. Can you reproduce it? No. Now, performance benefit. Arginine has been speculated, again, because of what it might do theoretically to growth hormone, although I would argue that's intravenous. But, synthesis of creatine, interactions with the Krebs cycle, there's a lot of things. But lately, and Phil, you know this, of course, is nitric oxide. Like, what can it do as a precursor to help this vasodilation kind of molecule do its thing, open up your vascular beds? And you've seen all kinds of claims with that. So nitric oxide, yes, it is a vasodilator. It was molecule of the year, years ago, because of scientists saying, hey, wow, this is interesting stuff. But we got to be really careful. The mechanism is not the end game. And this is something I really learned in industry. You get the scientists saying, oh, my God, it works. It was absorbed, or it works. It vasodilated. Okay, but are people leaner or bigger and stronger? Because, what's the so what there? And I have some friends who are lawyers and regulatory people that work with the FDA, and they're like, what's the end game? If you're going to make a claim, you can't just talk about, oh, it's a vasodilator. Well, meaning what, right? Because Mike and I have talked about this on the show before. You can open up a vascular bed. It doesn't mean you're going to get huge. Oh, it's going to carry in amino acids and oxygen. And it might. But Mike and I saw stuff where they use drugs like sodium nitroprusside, which really opens up, capillary beds, vascular beds. And it wasn't more anabolic. They measured protein synthesis. It didn't, Now, don't get me wrong. For a pump, sure. Better blood supply, sure. I mean, oxygen delivery, if you're an aerobic athlete, potential improvements there. Now, here's the research. A 2021 systematic review I found, and it was a meta-analysis by Rezaei, Rezaei and colleagues. They looked at 11 different clinical trials, indicated that L-arginine supplementation did increase VO2 max just a little bit compared to controls. Now, that's very interesting if you're an aerobic athlete, because there's a lot of supplements that's the one thing that's hard to move. I mean, our listeners, if you're not familiar because you're not a aerobic twink, then VO2 max is their bench press max, is their 1 rep max, right? And so this looks like it did bump it up. Maybe it was opening up blood vessels and maybe oxygen delivery. It said nitric oxide production and vasodilation were a potential mechanism, according to the researchers. The authors concluded that more studies are needed. They always say that, don't they? To confirm their findings and to further identify underlying mechanisms. It says the findings by Rezaei and colleagues are consistent with another meta-analysis from Viribay, Viribay, and colleagues in 2020, which stated that arginine supplementation could significantly improve aerobic, and get this, anaerobic performance tests. Further, acute supplementation protocols should be adjusted to 0.15 grams per kg. So if you want to make it according to your body weight, that's how these researchers did it. Consumed 60 to 90 minutes before go time. And chronic supplementation, if you want to try to get some ongoing effects over time, 1.5 to 2 grams per day for 4 to 7 weeks in order to improve aerobic performance, 10 to 12 grams per day for 8 weeks to improve anaerobic performance. Now, again, I don't think I'd be taking that all at once, but, single digits of this stuff in number of grams, okay. And again, Viribay did notice the mechanism might differ between acute versus chronic supplementation. So maybe the chronic stuff that happened was not just the acute blood flow kinds of stuff. Anyway, this is getting looked at mostly from an NO and vasodilation thing. It's in a lot of pre-workouts for that reason. Common usage, single or multiple doses of 2 to 9 grams are most often used. Again, you go do the per kg thing that I just mentioned, and don't take double-digit amounts of this. When we took They give us escalating doses, something like 3, 6, 12, 30 or something like that. And when we took double doses, we got diarrhea. It doesn't mean it's toxic. It just means it's going to sit in your bowels and draw water and give you the runs. Yeah. Anyway, health concerns, the observable safe limit of arginine is 20 grams per day, according to research. So, and again, I wouldn't take that all at once for sure. Anyway, I just thought I would give everybody an update on arginine it does look like it has probably more potential than I would have guessed looking at some of these data. But yeah, single amino acids can be a thing. And I just thought I would share that little education and research update. Again, if people are interested in that book, it's going to be a human kinetics book that's coming out later this year. And it's going to have a huge list of supplements. So I did apple cider vinegar a couple of weeks ago. Here's arginine. We'll go through this alphabetically, and I'll just share some stuff since I'm allowed to do that.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I think the single amino acid thing's been a thing for a little while. I mean, leucine and I think glutamine, I think mainly panned out with gut issues, but I mean, that could still be useful, but.
Yeah, I think glutamine might have a role with overtraining. Joey Antonio, one of the founders of the ISSN, he did a paper years ago about glutamine is not anabolic. And I'm thinking, okay, but hopefully that's not why athletes are doing it. They do it for overtraining. Yeah. Or like you said, for gut. Because when you overtrain, your immune system takes a hit and it gets in a tug of war with your gut and your muscles for glutamine. Mm-hmm. That glutamine's a good example too. They put like tyrosine in some pre-workouts because your body will turn some of that into epinephrine. I know that some people will do that. At least there's a nutrigenetic thing because you can see the metabolites of adrenaline in people's pee.
What I want to talk about is, it was actually Drell sent this over to me. Let me go to the homepage of the site because there's numerous things we can hit off on this. Basically, we have, if anybody's seen the old SNL skit, that's the one that always brings me back to the all drug Olympics, where the guy, they have the Olympic lifter and he goes for like a clean and jerk and it rips both his arms off. Whoa, he lost both of his arms. And, we've talked about it for years and that somebody should do this, like the all drug Olympics. And apparently, somebody is. And it looks like it's backed by a couple billionaires. I don't know who they are, but billionaire Peter Thiel is funding the Enhanced Games, a rival to the Olympics that would allow athletes to use performance-enhancing drugs. And I thought this was a joke at first until I logged in and looked at their site. And honestly, their Instagram post has a lot of 284,347 likes as of yesterday.
Oh, my.
Yeah, in a few hours. And thousands of comments. And basically what it's going to be, we can dig into this more, but it's basically allowing athletes to, backed by the world's top venture capitalists, the Enhanced Games is the Olympics of the future. It'll allow athletes to use performance enhancements safely and also celebrate science. And I figured we'd just, talk about this. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
At some point this is going to happen. And then they go into, I figure we can stop in this one thing at a time. They talk about the science, the pay for athletes, the health, the fairness, and all that. I figure we can hit it off one thing at a time. But in general, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see this because my initial thoughts are, well, like you talked about, okay, where are they going to do this? Because where can you do this that you're not breaking a federal law?
Right. Yeah.
So like you said, maybe it's on some freaking island offshore somewhere. I don't know. They haven't announced that yet. But I mean, I'm going to be instantly interested in viewership compared to the normal Olympics. Yeah. Because I have to guess, maybe not in year one, but once you see the results, I mean, I can't find a way in my head where the results for this, if they get enough athletes into it, if they end up with third-tier athletes, the drugs won't matter. Let's be honest. We've talked about this before. Yep. If you take a non-genetic freak and just put them on drugs, they're not going to be Captain America. Mm-hmm. It's when you join those two things together, when you take a genetic freak and give him performance-enhancing drugs, him or her, that's where special things happen. So if they're actually able to draw in top athletes, especially ones, there has to be a large pool of them, especially as of late, since the Olympics started their back testing and have just booted tons of athletes. Like, hey, these people now have an avenue. You know?
No, it's a good point.
I've
Phil,
been booted, so, and now these people are allowing it.
Like, you know what a lot of purists are going to say? Oh, cheaters, and they have to rely on drugs. How many people in retrospect have been busted just the way you just said? Lance Armstrong, as it turns out, he was on all kinds of stuff. So I think a lot of that kind of stuff, people need to just lay down the hypocrisy. In some ways, you can argue this is more truthful. Instead of masking agents and lying, and masking agents meaning drugs, that's drugs to block the appearance of other drugs. I can see there you can almost make a safety comment. And I don't want to get to the safety thing just yet, I suppose.
Yep.
But
and that's one of the first topics they talk about here is that, like you said, so the dishonesty of the Olympic Games already. So WADA, who is, if people don't know, it's the drug testing section of the Olympic Games, has done several studies that they gave people, basically you didn't get in trouble. You just did this, you got a piece of paper, your name wasn't on it, and 44% of participants were doping.
Oh, interesting.
And that's the ones who self-reported. So, could they be now? If this was the high school, like we used to take those little tests in high school or junior high, are you taking crack cocaine? And like we would jokingly, yeah, I am. But I'm thinking that these adult athletes were more honest than that,
mature,
more mature, and but I could still see where some of them were like, I'm not fucking telling the truth on this. I would think that this went in the opposite, and it was underreported still because not trusting that. You're not going to say who it is.
Exactly. By opening yourself up for no potential benefit.
There's no gain. So my initial guess would be that it's higher than 44%, and they go into just all the claims that since they've started the back testing, the stupid amount of people that have gotten popped because the drugs are always a decade ahead or 5 years ahead of the testing protocols. So at any given time, elite athletes are going to dope. And that's what they say in this. Basically they're doing it anyways. So, and they're not trying to say the Olympics needs to be stopped. They're just trying to give another avenue. But for viewership, I can't, if somebody all of a sudden in this comes out and clean and jerks 15% more than the current world record, or somebody runs an 8-second 100.
Yeah.
That's what people want to see.
I know.
So I would have to think the viewership just on that aspect would be greater. The average person doesn't give a shit. Like you said, basically what they think about is they've just been fed cheater, 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 and they don't realize that elite athletes are going to do it. They're going to take, it's like
it's part of the rules.
Yes.
You can't cheat. Then by definition, you're not cheating because it's allowed in the rules. Let's say then they say, but that's the drugs, that's not the person. All right, let's back up. Like you said, you feed drugs into a third-rate athlete, they're still not going to be truly world class. We've all seen people use anabolics and stuff, and they're just still not good. It's just not. It's not pretty.
We've had Dave and Jim on talked about it. Jim has said numerous times, if you take the NFL and you take drugs away, don't outlaw them, make them not exist. The same athletes are still going to be there. Because it's their drive, it's their genetics, it's just how they're wired. A lot of it is just the work ethic. You give a bunch of drugs to someone with no work ethic, they're just going to be fat still. And,
bloated. Yeah.
They're going to be fat, bloated, and have high blood pressure like they already do. It's just going to be enhanced. So, that's one thing to hit on and then the next one that they go into is the safety, which is actually the claims they make. We can talk about it, but at the Olympics, athletes are drug tested. That's the only testing they do, is what they're arguing. He said they're not tested for their health. They're not tested for, should they compete? Are they at a point in life where they should compete? Whereas this organization, they're just going to skip the drug testing part because none of them are in the rules, but every athlete is going to go through medical screening prior to competition, which will ensure that they are healthy enough to compete. Basically, they're going to go through echocardiogram, so basically check their cardiac health, their renal function, their blood count, their biochemistry, their renal function, their all that. So to give these athletes, it's not saying they're going to kick them out, but they're going to give them a medical information to see if they still want to compete.
Okay, because I was going to ask, like, where do they set the bar? Because, like, let's say somebody's taken a couple of grams of tea, accessory, anabolics, that kind of stuff. Their hematocrits, their red blood cell count's going to be real high.
Yes.
But if that's not jacking their blood pressure crazy, or if they're okay with that, like, in other words, some things are gonna change biologically, when you're on lots and lots of drugs. And it depends on the sport too. You're talking about, like, the number of people in retrospect get busted. Cyclists and bodybuilding and powerlifting. I know bodybuilding, the Weeders tried to get it into Olympics forever. Yeah, never really took off, did it?
Yeah.
But stuff like Olympic lifting or cycling and some of that kind of stuff, prime targets for this stuff. Obviously, you're not going to be on the same volume of shit if you're like one of these biathletes that, just basically, run around and shoot their whatever they do. I don't even know what they do. But yeah, I've heard that they might use beta blockers to try to slow their heart rate and take shots between beats. Or it's kind of like a reach by comparison, right? So, yeah, it depends. I would think the big-time cardiovascular aerobic sports where VO2 max is the end-all, be-all, or lactate threshold, like they said Lance Armstrong was so good at, or in the strength sports, you're going to see changes. People are going to be on enough stuff to really change. And it's interesting that you say, and if the athlete says, no, I'm still good. This is my health. It's my choice.
And that's what they state here. So the screening will involve echocardiogram blood tests and genomic sequencing in order to build a full picture of the athlete's health. This will allow athletes to make an informed decision about whether they feel they are safe to compete.
Okay.
Of course, my initial thought is any fucking driven athlete is going to be like, I'm good, let's go.
Yes.
Is the thing. But at least, and that's what I've argued for years. Like in the NBA and the NFL, like I've been fortunate enough to be behind that screen a bit and know, like with the NBA, for instance, when I was helping somebody, like they brought the testing protocol to us, me as a strength coach, because that was one of my questions. Like, what is your testing protocols? And after that, it may have changed because it's been a decade since I dealt with this. But after their rookie year, there was one day, once a year, that was known ahead of time that they had to test clean, that they could potentially get tested.
Yeah.
That just feeds.
Yes. It's so hypocritical.
George, you need to be clean this day for this hour.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, what's that telling me? That the owners and everybody else knows that these guys are taking things. And they
hypocrisy.
They don't want them to get popped. Like, hey, man, be clean on this day. So it's happening. But now what I see is at least like, okay, you're superstar. LeBron James has the money to blow to keep himself to get blood tests done, like health markers done.
Healthier, yeah.
Joe Schmo that's trying to make the league, who's living in his grandma's basement. We see this all the time. Like inner city kid that's been battling to get in the league. He walks on, like he doesn't have the money to do that. At least in this avenue, they have testing done by the organization. Just say, hey, man, at least a doctor has the chance to tell you, man, you might want to back off that a little bit.
Right.
At least they're informed.
Phil, one of the things that comes to mind is they have things like the PAR-Q exercise screening. It's just a real quick screen thing. Is someone healthy enough to exercise? Mm-hmm. And this is real rubber hits the road stuff, and they could do something like that with these athletes and say, listen, you passed the PAR-Q, if you will. And a lot of this stuff, let's face it, if someone's got like a blood pressure of 200 over 100, or they have uncontrolled diabetes or an arrhythmia where if they exert themselves, they're going to die. It's a fairly low bar, I would think, with a lot of this stuff compared to what some PEDs would do to you, I would think. Mm-hmm. I like the idea, honestly. I had a class, more than one, when I was a grad student on sports ethics, the ethics of changing ourselves, that from gene doping, which is a thing, and WADA, right, the World Anti-Doping Agency or whatever, they are aware of gene doping as well. Not so much of a thing yet, but I do think we're still moving in that direction. You see these people on YouTube self-experimenting with like CRISPR and stuff. It's just crazy. But when we talked about that, I mean, now this is purely theoretical, right? And people, I don't want anybody freaking out, but is it more ethical for someone just to be genetically gifted, or someone who is quite gifted, has an amazing work ethic, whatever, but they're not the genetic freak you talked about, but then they decide to learn how to make themselves better, which includes nutrition, supplementation, even pharmacy, and these guys are saying, let's celebrate science. So which is more ethical, the person who worked harder and learned to become world class, or the person who just was and it just born that way? Now, I'm not justifying one thing or the other. It's just an interesting ethical argument, isn't it? Like, one is not inherently better than the other. The people who cry cheater, they're basically saying the guy who didn't hit the books and learn how to do everything better and was just born with it, he is more ethically right from sheer dumb luck than the guy who busted his butt and learned how to do everything that was part of that training program. So it's just an interesting way to look at that. I'm sure it fires people up.
Oh, yeah. But if you look at it in any other sector of life, it's looked at the opposite way. Like, let's say you look at the person who is now a multimillionaire and they came from nothing. He is championed. Whereas Paris Hilton, who was born into millions and never had to work a fucking day in her life.
Good point.
Is the opposite. But in sports, it's not looked at that way. But it's still, like we talked about, when rubber hits the road, it's going to be that 0.1% of genetic freak that was born with the drive,
and also
uses. That's going to be the winner, no matter what. And that is, I would argue, that's the winner now. In most sports, including the Olympics, like we talked about with Lance Armstrong. It's well documented now. Like, I think he could have won a lot of shit without it, but it's well documented now that he was doping.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, most elite athletes will. It's like that little test that they did with the Olympians. Like, if you could take a drug that guaranteed you a gold medal, but you'd die within 5 years. Like, the resound, it was like 89% said yes. They're just going to do it. And they are doing it. And I think I don't have any ins into WADA and the Olympic Committee, but I have to think they're kicking themselves in the ass after they started that back testing, because it opened a bad kit. Like, it ended up being worse for them than better. I don't think they expected to hit the number they thought they did. They started like, oh my God, number 23 is now first. I don't think they expected that. Like, they had to ruin it, and I'm really surprised they didn't they let it out and didn't put the lid back on that and let's not do it. I'm really surprised they didn't do that, because it just made them look bad. But they go into that the history of doping, and it's like from the beginning of time, like ancient Greeks were using performance enhancing, Roman gladiators were using stimulants and hallucinogens. Like, these tribes have been using, like, from the beginning of time, people have been using things to enhance them physically in running and strength, and from day one.
Even academic stuff, you hear about mathematicians using like amphetamines and stuff, and
musicians
Yeah,
it's like it's been there and it's basically their argument. It's time to embrace that. It's like, science is real. It's part of our human culture, and it has been from the beginning of time. From the beginning of time, people have been looking for things to enhance their abilities, be they physical or mental, and that's not going to stop. And
Phil, think about past couple of years. I've heard Elon Musk say a number of times, like, we're all cyborgs, we're all enhanced. That phone on your hip, what's the first thing you do in the morning is you grab your phone. You can't leave your house without it, and because it lets you do performance at a higher level. right? You're from communication to knowledge acquisition to calculations, directions, so many things. You are essentially a cyborg with that on your hip. So in one sense, it does seem a little hypocritical for society to say you can't be enhanced.
Yep.
You could just give you what God gave you. You can only use what God gave you. Well, then you're not going to be able to text your spouse during the day. You're not going to be able to do those calculations. You're going to get lost. We're embracing technology to perform in all kinds of ways, but you're not supposed to do it in sports.
Well, yeah, and that's I would argue that most of the people screaming cheater, from what I have seen, are generally people that do not compete and have not competed.
Yeah.
They're sitting on their couch, eating cakes and pies, taking their Ozempic, but saying you're cheating for saying, like, they are taking things that enhance their ability to lose weight or whatever, stay healthy, but saying you're cheating.
Yeah, there's definitely there's a spectrum from dead to optimal well-being, right?
Yes.
And I actually show this like World Health Organization kind of thing in the classroom. We talk about how, like, in a nutrition classroom, like, clinical dietetics helps people move from away from dead and away from ill toward normal.
Yeah.
That is moving toward the positive, right?
Yep.
But sports nutrition moves from normal to super normal.
Yes.
But for whatever reason, when it comes to drugs, that's not all right. Like, it's okay to move toward health from illness to normal. And I guess my point here is then it starts to beg the question, what is normal, right? Do you mean the 50th percentile? And if you want to go beyond that, everything is bad? Yeah, there's a lot of like ethical debates and whole courses on this stuff, you know.
And I would argue it's even deeper than that. Yes, moving from abnormal in a bad way to normal. But the problem I'm seeing nowadays is there's a large group of people in this world that it's okay to move from unhealthy, abnormal to normal with drugs. But the reason they're in that unhealthy, abnormal state is their own personal choices.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's
it's part of it.
Type 2 diabetes is a big thing, and that is a lifestyle disease. But you're totally okay to take as many drugs as you need to keep eating your cakes and pies.
The whole GLP-1 agonists, you know, the Wegovy and all this stuff, they're doing it to lose weight and look better. So those people are such hypocrites, right? And then the same people would look at a bodybuilder, fitness athlete and be like, shame on you for using clenbuterol to get lean.
Bingo.
And you're on Wegovy, man, like just for aesthetic reasons.
And not even, it's more than that. Most of them that I know more than a handful of people that are on a handful of type 2 diabetes medications so they can keep eating their bullshit food.
Oh, man.
Which is just, that drives me nuts. It's like, literally, you don't want to put down the cakes and pies. You want to be able to take a pill that allows you to keep doing it. Oh, my God. You know, and they would say at the same time, oh, cheater. Like, holy crap.
Oh, no doubt.
You know,
because you're talking about someone who, I mean, a lot of this, when you look at ethics, like, one of the way to look at this is intent. What's my intent? Mm-hmm. You know, I used to have a debate with an old buddy of mine, Will, about whether or not anabolics were the soul of bodybuilding. Are they the point? And I would say no. And he argued that they were. And because he's like, listen, you can't look like Tom Platz. You know, back in the day, he would go on to talk shows on TV and all that. And this kind of topic always comes up. But I would argue, no. I mean, think about like when we've spoken to Bill Pearl back in the day. This guy, he's the kind of person, he's from that generation, they would use anabolics to get ready for an event, to recover. The training was the purpose.
Yes.
The show was kind of the purpose, the competition, but I would argue even just the day-to-day training was really the main purpose. But yes, you want to compete and see, you know, can I defeat my former best self or you know, my fellow man, whatever. But it wasn't, anabolics were not the soul of it, even though they enabled it at that level. Like you said, you would still have a lot of the same people. In fact, I think on one of those talk shows, Tom Platz actually used that argument. Again, we're talking about decades ago, that the best would still be the best.
Yep.
It's just that everybody would be small and soft.
And
I mean,
or
well, like you're saying, they'd be running a 40 in like 10 and a half seconds or 11 seconds. And it really strikes me when you say how many clicks and hits already this guy is getting.
Yeah, and that was yesterday.
Going to open the floodgates.
So, well, and that's what you're touching on there is also an interesting part because people say, okay, it's cheating because I don't want to do that. Like, okay, you want to be a natural athlete. Okay, well, you have your avenue. And arguably, maybe this will clean up the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue that. But I mean, that argument has been the same. Like I had to sit down with myself at points in time in my athletic career, and everybody does. Once you reach that point where you're just not a naive idiot and you realize that most everybody is taking performance-enhancing drugs, like you have to sit down with yourself. Okay, how far am I willing to go? And I'm sure you had to have that same talk with yourself. Like you knew
no doubt.
At one point in day you would not be Mr. Olympia because you would have to go to a certain level.
Or even compete in the nationals, right? The reason I stopped at the kind of regional level is I was pretty ripped as a light heavyweight. If I wanted to be a heavyweight, right, over 198, way over 198 in shape, I would have to not just use drugs. I would have to use a lot, and I would have to stay on. At that point, those guys don't even cycle. They stay on.
Oh yeah, when they say they're off, they're on like 2 grams.
Exactly. Exactly. And I couldn't, I couldn't make that choice. So I'm like, I guess I stay kind of small, and I do what I'm willing to do.
And that's okay is the thing. And that's one thing, like literally, and that's like I've had people come and say they wanted to be the world's strongest man. Okay, that's fine. And I had to have a talk with them about training and things and their drive. But then you have to have the talk about are you willing to do this?
The talk.
Yeah, like you just need to know that they are all, number one, they're built like frickin' Clydesdales. So if you're not there, no matter what you take, you're probably not going to make it. Are there some outliers? Yes, but still, you're gonna have to take massive quantities of drugs nonstop. That's just the way it is, and I'm not saying that's good nor bad. But that's a personal question you have to take. And that's also a personal question these athletes have to take. At some point in time, they sit back, and I don't think World's Strongest Man competitors are naive enough, stupid enough. They know what they're taking to do that is taking years off their life.
Right.
They're not dumb enough to think it isn't. They are making that informed choice to compete at that level, and they have accepted the negatives.
Right. Well, look at football linemen that are obese. You think that's not taking years off their life? I mean, yes, they're jacked as well, but you know what I'm talking about. They're definitely also body fat oriented obese. They're concussion risk. They take that, and we're doing everything we can to try to stop that and bring the awareness up. But those guys are still going to do it. They want to be in the league, and they're going to be paid crazy money.
Bingo. And I would argue, like, if anybody hasn't watched it, that Kels documentary. It's about Jason Kels, starting center, arguably the best center in the league. And he goes into that, the CTE stuff. He's like, I know that I am taking – he's like, the people bitching about CTE aren't the ones in it. He said, all of us in the NFL doing this, we know our risks. He said, I know there's a big chance later in life that I may not be able to recognize my kids and things like that. He said, that's the chance I'm taking. He said, I also know that I'm earning enough money to give my kids and my grandkids a better life.
Generations.
Yeah. Generational wealth. And he said, and I just have to make that personal decision of how many years is enough, because I know every year I go, my risk for brain trauma later in life goes up from years of doing it. So, and like in all extreme, anytime you go out of above decent, there are negative effects. There just are. If you're going to be an elite,
it's extreme.
Yeah, if you push things to an extreme, there are going to be, positive benefits, fame and fortune, but there are also going to be negative. Like me lifting 700 pounds every year for the last 15 years in deadlift, it has taken a toll on my body.
Yeah, it takes a toll.
And I know it. But I'm not dumb enough.
But but that's part of who you are. That's like your salient identity is like, in the Phil Stevens world, like this, I want to leave a mark. I want to self-actualize. And that's one of those arguments that come up too. Do people have the right to self-actualize, optimize, in whatever way they see fit. But again, at least in the States, and I know different European countries are different, and of course South American and even, Mexico and stuff like that. Different countries have different drug laws. But here, Schedule 1 anabolics, which I think is silly, to be honest. But was it Jim Wendler says it's federal crime to be excess male, right? It's just so it does beg the question then, because this looks like it's popular out of the gate, according to what you're telling me.
Yeah.
They have interesting argument to at least bring up, the ethical debate, and where they hold it. I got to think they could find somewhere on this globe, to hold these events. I mean, let's face it, people travel from all over the world for the Olympic Games or any world competition. The Mr. Olympia.
My guess would be it's going to be Dubai or something like that. It's going to be one of those places if it's all these billionaires. But I mean, like the topic we were just touching upon about the negative, I'd also argue that is the main thing that sets elite athletes apart from the average population. It's not their drive. It's they have somewhere in their heads given themselves permission to put up with the suck. And most people won't do it. That's what stops. Most people think, they look at the fame, they look at the fortune, and yes, that all looks great. All the ones I've seen that quit, they don't quit because of the love of chasing that. They quit because it fucking hurts and it's hard. That's why most people quit.
And it's also why a lot of people cry cheater or they get salty because misery loves company.
Yes.
These guys, I never begrudge the guys at the national level. Meanwhile, I've got I've had, gym mates and stuff in the past. Lonnie, you're never going to be truly huge because you're too smart, meaning you won't make those choices, brutally life-shortening choices. I mean, not just the discomfort I deal with now, but I didn't begrudge the people. I remember Kevin Levrone when he was at the national level. Oh my God. Yeah. I was so blown away, and I use those guys for inspiration. I wasn't going to be one of those people because they were making choices I wouldn't or couldn't make. I don't know. And yet that's what you get, right? The hateful, a lot of people, what you said just really rings true to me is, why is alcohol okay? You always hear this, the cigarettes and alcohol argument. Yeah. Those things are not Schedule 1, even though they destroy and kill people because people want them. Lots of people want them.
Yes.
It's easy for a politician to point at performance-enhancing drugs because less than 0.5% of his constituents even care. So he's not going to lose any votes by grandstanding and parading and bad-mouthing those things as so cheaty and dangerous and everything else when he doesn't even know. Ask him about the different, even just within the range of anabolics. Some things way toxic, some things not so toxic, to be honest, in my opinion. And but they don't care about that. It's the politics of it. But, Einstein said common sense is the collection of biases that we get by age 18. That's what you're actually combating on this, is a lot of the boomers and, yes, even people like Gen X, even millennials, they have this quote unquote common sense. Their bias is that just bad, you're never going to convince me otherwise. No matter how much evidence you can stack up in front of them that, oh, look, your HDL goes back to normal after a few weeks, after a cycle, or whatever it might be,
The other interesting thing that I think is going to draw athletes to this, and it's the last thing we'll touch on since we're running out of time, is pay the athletes. At the enhanced games, all athletes will be fairly paid. All athletes competing in the enhanced games will be paid. Eligible athletes, so basically if you qualify, eligible athletes will receive a base salary just to compete. And then there will be prize winnings, which will be much larger than any comparable event in history. The exact prize pool and compensation structure will be announced in mid-2024. And then it talks about how most Olympic athletes live in poverty for most of their career. Basically, I know Olympic athletes that have, like we talked about before the show, they literally went and they won a medal for the United States, and to receive their medal, they had to buy it. And they had to work at Home Depot and crap while they're competing, to get by. And at least these ones are going to, it's like, here, that's one thing that pisses me off about the Olympics. I understand it's an amateur competition, but who are they making their money off of? Why are they getting tickets bought? Why do millions of people go on TV and watch it or pay to go to these events? It's not for the Olympic Committee. It's the athletes that are earning the committee their money, and they're not getting shit. It's just like the NCAA that finally, when they passed the rules for the athletes to get paid, it's like those schools have been making millions off those kids for years.
Exploitation of these athletes,
And it's the same thing at the Olympic level. Yeah, I understand they're amateurs, and but they've already muddied that up when they let the NBA in.
Oh my God! For decades, that's been more and more muddy, right?
Yeah. So,
it's a great point. I mean, in some ways, I like the purity. Back when bodybuilding, powerlifting, like you said, these guys they were just landscapers, worked at Home Depot or something. They loved. I mean, to the point that it became their identity, what they do. Yes. And that's how bodybuilding was for me. I was a poor ass grad student for way too long. I don't think a lot of people realize when you go to school as long as I did, you give up your 20s. Yeah. That's a lot of money that you're not making, and you're staying poor, toward retirement or whatever else. Yeah. There's a price to pay. But we were broke and we just loved it, right? Like nose bleeding squats, baby.
Yep.
Yep. I mean, and it wasn't affected by the money. But in this case, if this guy does it right, and I don't know, like I said, two things: the Schedule I, the federal crime to basically do this is going to have to be overcome in some way, because this is not where they hold the event; it's where these guys train.
Yes,
right. So you can't get the power lifters and the bodybuilders, or Olympic lifters rather, or even the runners with the EPO and the doping and all that. How are they going to train? Because, I don't know how they even do that, but I think there are some provisions in those laws for even internal possession. Like you go to some country where you can do it, somewhere, random place in Central or South America or Asia or somewhere, and you just train hard, dope. Then you come back to the States and they bust you because your blood are high. That starts to become really draconian, in my opinion. Like that's scary 1984 dystopia kind of stuff. But it's going to open up a whole lot of questions like this. But oh my God, 2024, you said by mid 24.
Yeah, we're supposed to know the details, and then they have their, where is it at? The event plan. They had the sports. Basically, it's going to be track and field, of course, weightlifting, combat sports, aquatics, gymnastics. So, I mean, it'll be, I ain't going to lie, I'm going to watch. I'm going to at least maybe not watch the event itself, but I'm going to be watching what's going on here. You know what I'm saying?
It's going to draw lots of eyes just because of what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, even just to see if it works, if this crazy experiment will work, it's actually genius marketing.
It is. And the money aspect, like how much these guys going to win. Like if all of a sudden, if you go win gold and you get 7 figures, that's going to draw athletes. Like the Olympics are going to be hurting, I mean, it just is what it is. It's going to draw the best of the best if the money's enough. And that's what's going to be interesting. So
the money, you almost need the billionaire behind it all, right? To make the money part happen. Because even like I think about the Mr. Olympia, there's more money in that than there is in some of the other strength sports or muscle sports, if you will. But it's honestly, when you go look at compared to real professional athletes, in other sports, it's a tiny pittance. It's barely enough to cover their drug cycles together.
Oh, in strength sports, there's no money. Like it is true. Like athletes are lifting in poverty. Like most Olympic weightlifters in the United States, they shut down the Olympic Training Center. They don't have a place to go to. Like they used to go there, our top athletes, and have a free place to live and eat. Now they don't. They're at home. They're working a shit job to go train 7 days a week. And if all of a sudden there's this avenue where I can get base pay to train and maybe I can go to the Olympics and pay for my medal if I win it, or I can go here, get base pay and win $1 million.
Right.
Where do you think they're going?
Yep.
I mean, holy shit. So it'll be interesting.
Wow. Well, that's obviously that was enough to take up our whole show.
Yeah, exactly. So, but
interesting. Well, yeah. God, keep me posted because
I will.
You obviously heard about that first.
Yeah. So,
all right.
Well, everybody have a wonderful day, and drop us a line with your thoughts on this stuff. So.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community.
The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.